All right, welcome to another episode of the NFL Outdated Cover 2 series. This episode, we are talking about the Las Vegas Raiders, and I am joined by Jordan from SSAW. He is also the host of the Cover Zero podcast. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on. It's a really good time to be a Raiders we were talking about before we started recording, and can't wait to just start to dig into the details as we're looking ahead to football season.
Yeah, when we look at this season, I mean, is this probably the most excited you and other Raiders fans have been at the start of a season?
I would definitely say so. I mean, there's been several rebuilds that the team has went through recently, and this one seems to feel like the one that's the most cohesive, the one that you have a lot of faith in. And a lot of Raider fans know the cycle of where, and a lot of NFL fans know this general cycle where it's like you start to get excited and then things start to look good, and then you get some actual faith, and then it starts to look bad, and then you have no more faith and you wonder why you believe, but then things start to look good and just go in this perpetual motion. But yes, definitely feeling good about this season.
Well, the Raiders may be silver and black, but the Raiders Twitter is golden. At the beginning of the last season, it was just amazing, an interesting, and a really supportive group. But it was all over the map. I mean, excited, and then it just kind of went downhill. But when you look at last season, it's easy to kind of look at one player who kind of comes into this season, and we can kind of talk about some of the additions a little bit later here. But I just want to look at or ask you, where are you on Derek Carr? And I mean, have you always been a Derek Carr supporter, or where are you on him?
So it's the two parts to that question. Right now, to me, Derek Carr he's almost like in some way, shape, or form, he's considered that Mendoza line if you were to equate it to what a franchise quarterback is. You know what I mean? He's right there. There are certain quarterbacks in the NFL that you consider that I would look at like this. Is this guy a truck or is this guy a trailer? Right? Is he going to be the one that drives the ship, or is he going to get carried by the ship? And if you know the game enough, you can see the quarterbacks and the types of players that are that, or that are just, basically, a side to the main dish. Derek Carr is right in the middle of that. I think, is fringe top 10-ish quarterbacks, kind of around there. Not maybe in the top 10. You can maybe have him in the top 10. And I think as he gets more weapons around him and as the cast improves around him, he can have seasons where he dips into those areas. By himself, though, I think he's around probably like in that 10, 12-ish, something like that range. And I think with, the additions, which we'll get into, we are on the cusp of seeing him have, I think, arguably, this will be, I think, his best two seasons. If not this season, to next season will be the best two seasons that we've seen from him. And to the second part, have I always been a supporter of him? When he first arrived on scene, I did like that him coming out of Fresno State. I did think he was one of the best pure passers in the draft that year. It wasn't necessarily a year where you had a ton of quarterbacks that were really highly touted coming out, big time prospects, number ones, all that sort of thing. But at first, I really loved his aggressiveness, the way he was able to throw the ball downfield, his touch throws, his guts. He's always been a really good dude to have on a team, good locker room, really positive influence. But there was that time when, after the 2016 season, when he ended up breaking his leg, that year he was on track to be an MVP, where whatever it would have been, either learning another new system and trying to find his way with John Gruden, getting skittish, refusing to really take chances, that was where I was like, this guy's done. He's done. Maybe we all know when Sam Darnold was seeing ghosts, it seemed like that was going to be a tagline of what we're going to remember him as. And it almost seemed like we were remembering Derek Carr as really just this check down Charlie. And to see him go back to a lot of his roots over the last two seasons and really start to open it up, really get the Raiders into a playoff game, come as close as they did to beating a team that represented the AFC in the Super Bowl. I really like seeing that. And just with everything that we have added, I really honestly think we're on the cusp of seeing him have arguably, if not his best seasons in these next 2 years.
Is that why he's so polarizing? I mean, there's so much potential there. I mean, I don't know what type of car you would call him, but he has, the I don't know, ability to be like a BMW, Mercedes, or I don't know what, but there's a lot of potential there, though.
There is, and the thing with him, and we really noticed this, I think, after wondering after that 2016 season again to bring that up, but after that, if he was ever going to get back to anything of that nature. And in 2020, I specifically remember the game against the Chiefs And then the game against the Chiefs, the first game against the Chiefs, when we beat them in Arrowhead, when they were, towards the pinnacle of their Kansas City powers before all the too high stuff was making Mahomes do what, during the beginning part of last year. But he showed that in that primetime game that he can hang with the best. He showed last season he has a lot of clutch ability, but he also has shown those plays where he leaves a lot on the table. So what kind of car is he? He's a Volvo. He's safe, right? He's ultimately safe. He's pretty risk averse, but Volvo, if you look at like a lot of the lines of their cars, and sometimes if you're driving down the street and you see one out of the corner of your eye, and it's one of the newer ones, the sleeker ones, and not those old boxy looks, you sometimes see Derek Carr as this safe, boxy quarterback. But sometimes it's like, wait a minute, what is that? Oh, that's a Volvo? Sometimes Derek Carr can be that. And I think with a lot of the additions, we're going to see a lot more of the 2022 Volvos rather than those old, boring, boxy ones that, hey, they're at least safe.
Well, speaking of one of the biggest offseason additions, Davante Adams, and what is he going to add to this? And what then also looking at Carr, I mean, the role that he played in recruiting him to the Raiders, I mean, that's huge, right?
Oh, it's immense. It's really immense. And bringing in Davante, this is by far and away the best single weapon that Derek Carr has ever had. Ever. Like right now, up to this point, you'd say that his best receiving threat he's ever had is probably Darren Waller, who's still there, obviously. And then on the outside, he hasn't had really much of anything beyond Michael Crabtree, Amari Cooper. Hunter Renfrow really just was an amazing find this last season. But to specifically Davante Adams, this is a guy that we all know can just destroy one-on-one coverage from all over the field. I mean, his release package is absolutely amazing. And the fact that he doesn't even have to use his hands when getting away from press is just, as a former receiver myself, played JUCO ball, I just can't understand how a dude can be so just savvy at that. It's just, I love breaking it down and watching it. But he's going to give Derek Carr a guy that opens up everything else, is going to be able to command so much attention from a defense. And I just think that the sky's the limit. Really, with the chemistry they obviously have in there at Fresno State, they've continued to work out in the offseason together. And Davante also, there's a couple of people that are on this Patriot staff. I know, I think it's Edgar Bennett, the receiver coach right now. He overlapped with Davante Adams in Green Bay as well. So the chemistry extends beyond just the signal caller. We're also going to see it extend to the position coaches as well.
Well, extending to, some of the other additions with the draft, that was a big part of the draft, kind of giving away draft picks, but it's definitely worth it. But, looking at some of the Raiders draft picks, what do you see? Do you see any other impact players in this draft? And how is Zamir White going to fit in, and some of these others here in the Raiders draft?
It's funny, there's two ways of looking at like a draft haul, especially when you make a trade like the Raiders did leading into it. Is the pick that you had in the first two rounds, since you gave up those picks, of course, to Green Bay, was Davante Adams your first pick, your second round pick? Is that what it was? Is that how you look at it? And if so, you make that deal 10 times out of 4. You know what I mean? You do it every single time. So knowing that we're not going to pick until pretty late in the third round, I want to say like Parham was like around 66, 65 overall, somewhere in that range. I had a list of guys going into draft night that I was like, okay, I'm kind of anticipating these guys as like day 2 dudes later on. And I wanted an interior offensive lineman because throughout the course of last year, we saw just how that was a downfall of the offense, if anything. And I believe a lot of football starts within the trenches. What you're able to do can start within the trenches, and to be able to keep your quarterbacks clean, be able to keep them upright and working is very valuable. And grabbing Dylan Parham, I think, was a really, really nice add at that spot. I like the way he moves. I like the way he uses his hands. Very athletic guy, can dip his hips really low and sink nicely. He has to do some work in terms of dealing with power, picking up stunts and loops and like impact type of blocks. But when you're picking a guy at that point in the draft, you want guys that have traits that you can work with. And I definitely think that's something that Dylan Parham has. And at the very least, he's going to push people for competition and push people for time in that interior offensive line, even if he doesn't see a snap this year. So really like that pick right there. And as far as Zamir White goes, I mean, I remember watching that dude at Georgia, and north-south punishing runner. Like, he's similar in that mold to Josh Jacobs, where it's like, if you want to come up and tackle him, you're going to have to earn it. And he's going to remind you of it this down, the next down, the next down, the next down. And that's really what he's going to bring, is just another battering ram to that backfield, another short yardage bull too.
I would say I like his story as well. I mean, he's had to overcome a lot.
Just like Josh, like similar to
Yeah.
Josh too.
Yep.
Both of them. It's really awesome when you can find guys like that. And then just the only other pick that I was familiar with is Neil Farrell coming out of LSU. I mean, he had his best season arguably last year. And to me, it's funny when he was coming out, a lot of people comped him to Jonathan Hankins, the defensive tackle for the Raiders right now, who they just picked up on another 1-year deal. So whether or not they want to try to re-up Hankins, he's getting up there in age and has had a lot of usage in the NFL field, but he's been effective. And if he can't be, then you don't have to necessarily move on or keep him on the team going forward. You can then maybe use Farrell in that role. And so I really like those 3 picks in particular, and then just taking stabs later. I mean, once you get to the 7th round, it's like, you don't know if there is such thing as a bad pick.
Yeah, and you look at overall the draft. I mean, like you said, you don't just look at the picks, but you look at the whole haul. And picking up Davante Adams, for a franchise that's where they're at. I mean, this was kind of what they needed to do, overall to really compete, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, we've seen what the entire AFC West did in this offseason, and every team I feel like in the AFC already knows through one way or another, you're going to have to compete with the juggernaut of the Chiefs. You're going to have to do that. I mean, that team has been in the AFC title game, 4 straight years now, and they are arguably 2 overtime periods away from going to 4 straight Super Bowls. If we look at, we're a D Ford's offsides penalty, or we are just, simply a crazy Jesse Bates interception away from them being in 4 straight Super Bowls, basically. So you're going to have to go through Kansas City to some way, shape, or form. So how are you going to compete? How are you going to be able to match that octane that offense is capable of putting up? And just acquiring someone like Davante Adams is a real nice way to be able to keep pace in the tough AFC West.
So we'll get back to some of the other, Raiders players in a bit. But since you brought up the Chiefs, I wanted to kind of ask. I mean, are the Chiefs the team that you're worried about most in the division?
I can't say no yet. I can't say.
See, it's
tough. I would say they are. They are.
See, in a lot of times, you have a team in name, right? In fantasy football, this happens, right? You see a name out there, and like they have to be good. I'm going to snap them up. With Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, they've done it before, so you trust them. Like they were, floundering last year, and a lot of people were like saying, they're going to turn it around, and they did because of obviously Patrick Mahomes, but a lot of it was Tyreek Hill as well.
Sure.
So, maybe talk me off the ledge a little bit. I'm thinking in my mind, the Chiefs are actually going to finish last in this division. I just don't see. Yeah, I just don't see, all these other receivers and just everything that Tyreek Hill gave to that offense. So, I mean, am I way off base on that?
I would look at it like this, and this is why. I mean, on one hand, we remember the last time that the Chiefs were in the Super Bowl, they were going against Tampa Bay. And the problem was that Patrick Mahomes was back there running for his life.
Exactly.
And that offensive line since then was a priority right away, drafting Creed Humphrey, acquiring Orlando Brown. I mean, they made a lot of moves in there that have really solidified that and taken that off the table. And of course, if I'm Kansas City, I do whatever I can to keep Tyreek Hill with Patrick Mahomes. That duo is just that type of speed and that type of arm were just insanely deadly. But there's only so much money to go around. You only have so much of the pie to dole out within the salary cap. So they felt like they could let him walk and invest in their premier quarterback while still also having Travis Kelce, who you could even argue is Ben Mahomes' number one guy in terms of how much he uses him. Tyreek's just the one that seems to scare people the most, and rightfully so. But how did they address that? I think there's only one Tyreek Hill, that type of game-breaking speed, and he does a lot of different things. And I think they did a really good job, at least, of trying to piece together ways to still have on that offense what he brought to it. So they added Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who's definitely not Tyreek Hill. We all know that. But he's a vertical deep threat. He can get down the field and get deep. And if he can catch the ball, unlike he did in 2020, running deep for Aaron Rodgers, he's still had 7 TDs. He was still just, big field flipping type of plays. That's on the table. Okay. But he's not the dude after the catch that Tyreek Hill is. So what do? You find Sky Moore, who was a prospect that I really liked. I had a first-round grade on, honestly, coming out of Western Michigan, who is that yak guy, who is that after the catch, can make people miss in the open field, which was another element that Tyreek Hill brought. And then the third piece that they brought to that also being Juju Smith-Schuster, who can function well in the slot, can find the soft spots in zones, big body receiver, good hands, reliable on third down. And if you aren't really accounting for him because you're dealing with the speed that Valdez-Scantling has, the matchup nightmare that Kelsey is, and trying to function trying to figure out what they're doing with Sky Moore after the catch, that's when Juju in a one-on-one is a nice option with somebody like Mahomes who can find him and put him the ball in an advantageous position. So really, I don't think their offense is going to necessarily have the same boom, but it's going to be a really, really good offense. And I mean, they still have a defense that seems to, under Steve Spagnuolo, figure it out when they need to. And especially considering the haul they made on defense this year in the draft. I love Trent McDuffie. I love George Karlaftis. They have some good people in the second level. Sure, Tyrann Mathieu kind of didn't have necessarily his usual year, but he's gone. He's on another squad right now. But I do think they have enough pieces there to still be that team that I worry about the most, because even last year when they were having the bad time, we had a show on the Cover Zero podcast. Will the Chiefs be in the AFC title game? I was the only one who said yes. And there they were.
But you're not worried about their running game at all, are you?
Not. I think that's kind of something with an Andy Reid offense that you always don't really think about that when you look at an Andy Reid offense. You know what I mean? The running game isn't something that always that scares you. Am I worried about it? Not necessarily, not 100%, but I think what it'll be utilized as is when teams do want to play those two high safety shells, they do want to present those light boxes. I think that's more on the table for him to go to this year if they can get something out of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, because he certainly hasn't looked like a first-round pick yet through whatever reason it was. So you're not really worried about it, but it's Mahomes, it's Reed, it's Kelsey. It's just what they have been since they've been there, and I can't just completely dive into the Chargers. We've all seen the Chargers look good every year, and they look great. Don't get me wrong. And I mean, I can't go anywhere other than Kansas City as being the team that scares me the most, because you can do everything right, but Mahomes can just be Mahomes.
And Russell Wilson doesn't scare you with the Broncos as much?
So that's kind of my hot takey pick, I guess you could say, of the year of the AFC. I think the Broncos finished last in the AFC West. I think the Broncos finished last in the AFC West. Russell Wilson, we haven't necessarily seen elite level Russ except for that first half of 2020. The first half of 2020, when everyone in Seattle wanted to let Russ cook, they did, and he was on God mode that year. He was lighting people up, and the defense didn't look really good. And there was that Week 7 game against Buffalo where he got sacked like 7 times. And then Pete Carroll kind of went back to the run, went back to that conservative nature. And then last season, Russ didn't necessarily have the best start for maybe weak offensive line, whatever it would have been. Then he got hurt after hitting his hand on Aaron Donald's helmet. And then when he came back, it still didn't quite look the same. The guy is getting older. The guy hasn't been a conventional quarterback ever since he's been in the NFL. A lot of his success has came out of structure, has came from scrambling around and making off-script, improvisational, just wow type of plays and throws. And it's not easy to play with a guy like that. Having Tyler Lockett, having that chemistry with Tyler Lockett for so long was important. And just being able to make things happen off script, he may not necessarily have the same athleticism to be able to escape the things like he used to. And is he still going to be good? Of course. He's Russell Wilson. Is he definitely an upgrade over Drew Lock? Of course. But honestly, in this division this year, with the way that roster looks, I'm envisioning it not getting off to the best start. And they'll still be a good team, but there's going to be a team in the AFC West that has 9 wins this year that in another division would have likely been an 11 to 12 win team.
Yeah. And, getting back to the Raiders, it's going to be so interesting. And I'm wondering, with their wide receivers, I mean, with Davante Adams, that's going to be, solid. You got Hunter Renfrow. But what about the running game? I mean, Josh Jacobs, can he stay healthy? And I mean, this is his last year. They didn't pick up his option, right? And then my question is then, what about the other running backs? Obviously, we talked about Zamir White. What are their roles going to be in that offense?
Can Josh Jacobs stay healthy? The idea that a lot of, I think, optimistic Raider fans are looking at to say yes, the reasoning behind that would be the stable of backs like you were bringing up. You know what I mean? Take some pressure off him. Don't use him like a bell cow. We don't need to just have those 20 plus carry games for him, because that's how running backs get hurt somehow, unless you're Derrick Henry. Well, even though he did get hurt last year for a little bit, but then still came back and was Derrick Henry. But As far as his running style, regardless of how many carries he's getting, if it's 14 touches a game, something like that, his running style opens up the avenue of being injured. That's on the table when you're that type of violent and punishing runner. And the only way he knows how to run the ball is like that. And so that's what you want him to do. You want him to be who he is. Mm-hmm. And injuries happen in this sport. We all know it's car crashes every single play. And can he stay healthy? We all hope so. But it's just his running style suggests that that's not the most likely occurrence, just because of running backs get hurt, they get injured, and this, especially like him, that's what I see happening. As for Zamir White, is he the future? I think he will have a role in this team. It's going to be interesting to see how much Josh McDaniels goes to that Patriot approach. By 1 week, it's Sony Michel. 1 week, it's Ramondre Stevenson. 1 week, it's Brandon Bolden. And the next week, we're just going to use our scat back with James White. Just having guys in different roles, which I love. I love that type of approach. You know what I mean? Having game plan specific type of approaches. So Kenyon Drake won't be on the team next year either. And so Josh won't. But we'll see, man. There's a lot of different ways they can go. And as long as you have enough dudes to fill out the roles that you need, I think the running back position should be taken care of.
Yeah, I mean, team wise, it's good to prolong the health of your team, but fantasy wise, it's tough to figure out.
Very much is. It very much is. It's frustrating. And last year I grabbed Kenyon Drake. I didn't want to reach for Josh, especially knowing people in your fantasy draft. And I have a couple drafts with various Raider fans, and I know they're going to take Josh before me. And like you were saying, similar to Zamir White, like Josh's story, I love the kid so much. Like the person he is, the human he is, the runner he is. There's not a thing that you could dislike about Josh Jacobs, but it's just the nature of the beast. Sometimes there's just only so much of the pie to go around. And unfortunately, this is where we are in the NFL when it comes to paying running backs.
Well, you brought up another Josh McDaniels. And are you trusting Josh McDaniels 2.0? I mean, what does he have to show you this year as a coach?
Oh, what does he have to show me? That's a good question. A lot of Belichick's disciples have failed. Mm-hmm. I do think probably the best example of a Belichick disciple as far as jumping into a head coaching role and being able to do the coaching role pretty good, still having a good handle on the offense, at least that comes to mind, is Bill O'Brien. Bill O'Brien, the GM, was awful, but Bill O'Brien, the head coach, as everyone was talking about, Bill O'Brien, the GM, got Bill O'Brien, the head coach, fired. So, and Josh, when he was over at Denver, it didn't go well. Mm-mm. It did not go well at all. And I don't necessarily think that was maybe his time, or obviously it wasn't. And he was with Bill for a long time. And there's been rumblings about Josh McDaniels leaving the Patriots for a long time. And finally, this is the first time where we saw him go. And I have to trust in him right now. I do think he has a good handle on what it takes to be able to work with different quarterbacks, having seen him work with offenses that don't feature Tom Brady. He had Cam Newton one year. They were still relevant. He had a rookie quarterback in Mac Jones last year. They were still beating good teams and still in the playoffs last year, even still. So, I mean, he's going to bring that Earnhardt-Perkins system that he runs, kind of his own version of it, which is like, not to get too X's and O's here, but like the West Coast offense is what Derek Carr and the Raiders have been running for a while underneath John Gruden. And that's a lot more like F spot. It's a primary receivers that go to secondary reads. This system that McDaniels runs, just kind of in a short Cliff Notes version, it's a lot quicker. You might have two concepts built into one play. You're going to have a sail on this side. You're going to have an ink concept, which is an in and a curl on the other side. Things like that. And Derek Carr, that's going to really allow him to go up tempo. It's really going to allow him to access that no huddle when they find teams in advantageous fronts or formations that they like, people they want to pick on, etc. All those things. So I think he has a good handle on how to get a lot out of quarterbacks. Derek Carr, I don't want people to think I'm comparing him to Tom Brady for a second, but in terms of style, they are pocket passers. They are read the defense, get the ball out when you need to. Just style-wise, there are similarities there. And in Derek Carr's heart of hearts, of course, he'd want to be Tom Brady, but that's how they look at the game. Just paper cuts if they need to, or deep shots when they need to. And I think Josh McDaniels' offense puts that on the table for Derek.
So, yeah, and not only that, I mean, this offense could be really good for Hunter Renfrow then as well.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the guy. You got to worry about Davante. You got to worry about Waller. And I think this is one thing, too, with another thing with bringing in Davante to this Josh McDaniels offense. There's been a bullseye on Davante Adams for the last several years over there in Green Bay. There's really not too many other people you got to worry about. Of course, Aaron Rodgers, but the bullseye's on Davante. Now the bullseye's on Davante. There's Darren Waller. There's Hunter Renfrow. There's Josh up the middle. Like there's these other areas to worry about. So I really think that helps the team as a whole.
When you look at one of the other weapons we were talking about, Darren Waller, where does he rank among NFL tight ends? I guess maybe that's the second part of the question. The first part of the question was living here in Wisconsin. There were rumors in the draft that the Packers were going to get him. I mean, was that anywhere near going to happen?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
Yeah, it was. I don't know. You know how the pre-draft buzz goes, where all this stuff is happening, and we're trying to predict things that aren't concrete. So that's kind of what I chalk that up to be.
Yeah. Sometimes you get a team that gets hopeful, like, okay, well, we're going to get this guy, and you kind of knew when he came out for the draft that wasn't going to happen. When he came out,
most definitely. But to rank Darren, oh man, Travis Kelce's the best. After him, I would still put George Kittle. Those are your two. The next guys that come to mind, Mark Andrews really had a breakout year last year. Really, and he can block better than Darren for sure. And so probably have to put him there for now. So then it comes into, I'd probably put then Waller at 4th, 3rd, somewhere around there. The other guy is that I think we're going to see be rising on this list is Kyle Pitts soon. I mean, he is just a cyborg out there. He's right there. He's definitely top 5, arguably could push to top 3. And see, I'd probably put him 4th for me. 4th.
So, yeah, when you look at him, just how talented he is, and it's easy then when you look at Davante Adams being added to that offense, and from a fantasy football perspective, you want to maybe stay away from Darren Waller. But I don't know, case study with the Chiefs. I mean, Kelsey and it was still productive with Hill, probably even more so. Both of them, when Hill was there. So Darren Waller is still going to be, obviously he's talented, but he's still going to be productive this year, regardless of who's in that offense, right?
Oh yeah, most definitely. And it's kind of a lot of what that McDaniels offense lends itself to. Of course, you're going to look at matchups, and you're going to feed Davante. You're going to take those chances on one-on-ones, back shoulder fades. You're going to put the ball up high for Darren to go up and get it. And that's who Carr has a lot of chemistry with playing with. And I remember when the first game last year, it was like through the first half, Darren Waller had 13 targets in the first half of the Ravens game on primetime. And, he missed some time last year, and it's noticeable when he was gone, but definitely a tight end now. I think there's going to be that sweet spot where you always want to go with tight end. That one way you can approach it in fantasy is, you can either go be one of the first ones or one of the last ones. That's kind of how I feel is the way I approach tight end. This might be a guy that you could take in the middle-ish rounds, because a lot of people will be like, oh, the attention is going to go, he's not going to get as many targets. They're going to feed Davante Adams. They're going to run the ball, whatever it is. But definitely, I still think he's such a huge mismatch nightmare, and for them to not utilize him with having everybody else around, I do think he's going to be a really solid option this year, and someone you may not have to grab as high as you did before.
Well, speaking of, hopefully a more solid option this year for the Raiders is their defense. I mean, they brought in, Chandler Jones. Talk about that defense in some of the key players this year for the Raiders.
It was the first part of a lot of the offseason moves started with bringing in Chandler Jones, like you said. And Yannick Ngakoue and Max Crosby last year, between the two of them, the sum of their overall pressures was number 1 in the NFL amongst defensive end edge rusher tandems in the entire league between the two of them. So that was really awesome to see, especially, Raiders are often remembered from the first thing John Gruden did when he got onto the squad again with his return, is he traded away Khalil Mack, who was the only reason that the Raider defense was viable for a long time when he was there. That one dude just balling out. And to be able to get such a gem like Max Crosby that late, I'm glad they made it a priority to ink him up long-term. Definitely deserved it. Really changes the defense when you can get pressure rushing 4 up front. And then to bring in Chandler Jones opposite him. I mean, Chandler Jones is very, very well could be a Hall of Famer right now. If you look at his numbers overall, his sack production over time, I mean, and you start to compare him to other guys that are in the Hall of Fame already or will be in the Hall of Fame soon, and considering he's still playing and still has time to add to his resume, I mean, if you can put a potential Hall of Famer who is not too far outside of his prime, if he's not still in it, because last season he did have a 6-sack game against the Titans before he had, his injury troubles and things like that. But You bring that to the other side of Max, and that really just puts a lot of stress on an opposing offense, and it allows you to create pressure without having to blitz. Not that Patrick Graham won't, because he likes to be multiple, but those two on the outside is really huge. I think trading for Rock Ya-Sin in the process of getting rid of Ngakoue was big, because corner right now is, I think if everyone can stay healthy, of course, the trio of having Trayvon Mullen as your number 2, Rock Ya-Sin as your number 1, Nate Hobbs, the rookie standout that we grabbed in the 5th round last year, was excellent playing that nickel role. Granted, in Gus Bradley's system, as much cover 3 as he was running, you're mostly just playing strong side flat, which is a pretty, static role. He's going to do a lot more in Graham's defense. I'm confident he can adjust and really perform well within that. So I think those are kind of the guys that are really going to stand out, and if they can stay healthy. And of course, Trayvon Merrick was such a find last year, getting him in the 2nd round out of TCU, being able to play very well as just a deep safety. He's going to really, really shine again and continue to grow. I really love what I'm seeing from him. And having Denzel Perryman, having a career resurgence in the middle, we're going to see him outside of a Gus Bradley defense for the first time in a long time. So I want to see how he plays well there. So those are really the key guys. And I think this year is really we're going to find out a lot about Jonathan Abram this year, because over in New York, Patrick Graham had a player that was pretty similar to him in Jabril Peppers. Undersized, like he's a safety. That's not maybe necessarily the best cover guy. He's a box safety first and foremost, with how much the NFL likes to spread teams and run like a lot of different spreads and make guys cover. Being a hitter, being Steve Atwater in today's NFL isn't what Steve Atwater was in the 90s, because you could tee off on dudes, and really being a force in the middle and putting fear in receivers was different than it is now. We all know this. So that's going to be really someone that to look at and pay attention to see how he can perform, because he's been picked on that hasn't necessarily looked like a 1st round pick since we grabbed him.
So if you look at overall the defense, would the secondary probably be the weakest part of this defense?
Yeah, it's thin. It's thin. I think, I wouldn't be too surprised if we see Abram playing more of what he did in Gus Bradley's role. He was playing more like towards the line of scrimmage, just finding ways to use him. I wouldn't be surprised if Daron Harmon takes some snaps from him. He was used a lot in the defense at Bill Belichick when he was with New England, and he's on the team now as another backup. And it's just, we're so thin. If we get one injury to an outside corner, Trayvon Mullen has been hurt a couple of years, only going into his 4th season. If then that injury happens, that you're bringing in Anthony Averett, who was a backup for Baltimore last year, and a lot of people saw him getting beat pretty constantly over there when he was with Baltimore. So, I mean, one injury in the secondary, which isn't unlikely. It's more likely than it's not. If that happens, especially at free safety with Trayvon, or especially at corner, it's going to start to look pretty rough on that back end. And especially being that who's on the schedule this year outside of the AFC West, we got the Rams. We got to go play Kyler Murray in Arizona. Granted, it's going to be when DeAndre Hopkins is still on his suspension. You know what I mean? But it's really tough to be weak at a reactionary position in the NFL. And secondary is a reactionary position. And it's tough because teams can just pick on you if that's a weakness. And it can really, really, really just bring a whole defense down.
Yeah, I mean, even you thinking it, in division, just how much tread it's gonna. I mean, definitely gonna be really stressed early and often.
Oh yeah, It's everything. You got to play all these teams twice, and it's just when there's an injury, it's going to be like, oh, I'm just going to be so worried about it. And of course, opposing teams know attack the backup. It's just really easy to do it. We saw the Bengals, as great as they were last year, as big as a surprise they were. Their defensive weakness was teams were going to attack Eli Apple. We saw it in the second half of the Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. We're going to get Eli Apple matched up on Cooper Kupp or Odell Beckham before he went down with the injury, obviously. And we're just going to spam it. We saw the offensive, where they had like reactionary positions on offense, is offensive line, the interior offensive line. We're going to attack Isaiah Prince. Over and over and over. If you're weak at reactionary positions, teams can just hit you with it until you stop it.
Well, speaking of reacting, when you looked at the schedule, what was your reaction as far as like looking at wins and losses? And then what are your expectations for the Raiders season this year?
Oh, man, it's looking at the schedule. I would say still, I think this team is a 10 to 11 win team this year. Mm-hmm. 10 to 11 wins is where I would put it. If they get 12, I will be surprised, just with how tough the schedule is, the division is, and how tough it is to win in the NFL in general. It is hard to win in the NFL. It's the most team-oriented sport in the world. in the world, with how many people touch the field, with how many people can impact the field, with how good one guy can be. I mean, we all know this. I don't have to get into that, but like, I would say 10 to 11 wins is the expectation this year, and a playoff berth. And I mean, we're going to have to wait and see. There's a whole long season ahead once we get there. I mean, a playoff berth, and I think with how much better the team got from the offseason going into this year, a playoff win should be something that we see for the Raiders. Just getting out of the first round, and let's go from there.
Full disclosure, I actually have picked the Raiders to win the division.
Let's
now,
go.
You're scaring me though a little bit with that secondary, but with that offense, they may be able to keep up with other teams regardless. I mean, you see, even that division, you're going to have to when you have Mahomes, and then even look at in the AFC, you're going to have to when you have Josh Allen, and they may be able to. And so, obviously there's a lot of questions on, anytime, a new player comes, and a lot of, questions with Derek Carr and everything, but there really is, no question that it's Derek Carr's team, right?
Yeah, it is. He's really, he's always been a great guy, as I was mentioning earlier, a great dude in the locker room.
Mm-hmm.
And something with Carr, I think, that he really embodies is something that over time I've realized what's important, not just in football, but in any type of profession that you're doing and anything you're doing. It comes down to relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And Derek Carr has great relationships with his coaches, with his players. He still is in communication with Henry Ruggs, as tragic as that situation was.
Mm-hmm.
He's still there for him, talks about how he reaches out to him constantly to check in on him. And you really haven't heard a lot of people or teammates ever really say that they don't like Derek Carr, the person, that they don't see Derek Carr being a leader, that he doesn't demand things out of his teammates that he doesn't demand out of himself. And, when he understood that it was, Davante's can get his money. He wants to take less so other people can get theirs too. And his contract, it didn't break the bank. And something even with that contract that I don't think is being mentioned enough. I don't think it'll happen, but let's say it just goes really bad next year with Derek Carr. I don't think it'll happen at all. But the Raiders can get out of that contract. They can get out of that contract, cut bait before any of that $40 million, $30 million, whatever. He doesn't make $40 million until 2024. But if you break down the average per year, looking at the contract, it would be $40 million a year. But just the way that it's arranged, it's not necessarily that. So, I think we're really about to see, especially as the salary cap continues to go up, that he's going by 2024 and he's making $40 million, especially when the Apple money comes in and how much money the NFL is going to have. Because every year the salary cap goes up. We're going to be looking at what percentage of the salary cap he is. He's going to be again on what is mostly a team-friendly deal.
Well, speaking of Derek Carr, I just want to play a little bit of a game here.
Okay.
It's called Derek Carr Or.
Okay.
All right. So we talked about, him maybe being that Mendoza line, and, maybe some of the younger listeners don't know, obviously that was the, I can't even remember his first name, but in baseball, it was, a certain batting average that you have to hit. So when you look at Derek Carr and you look at other quarterbacks in the National Football League, so as a Raiders fan, would you rather have Derek Carr or Ryan Tannehill?
Derek Carr.
Okay, I agree there. Some of these are, relatively easy.
Sure.
Zach Wilson.
Derek Carr.
Okay. Mac Jones. Oh.
The only reason why I'm hesitating is, and why I thought of this, with especially when you said Zach Wilson, is because of that rookie deals, QBs on rookie deals. We all know what that can open up. But I feel like the Raiders are in more of a win now, strike now, based on what we have. So Derek Carr, I think, will have the better season than Mac Jones this year and next year. I would say that.
Russell Wilson. Oh, this one's tough.
It is tough. Russell Wilson has, if we were to do top 10 quarterback rankings, you still have to put Russ in that top 10. You still would.
Is it just because he's already won a Super Bowl?
I think he's shown heights very recently that Derek Carr, he's shown, like I was saying earlier, first half of that 2020 season, the heights that Russell was playing at then were heights that Derek Carr has never reached. We've never seen him play there. But as I was also talking about why I have the Broncos finishing in last, they're going to come for me. Derek Carr. Right now, Derek Carr.
Okay.
Now, Derek. I think just because Russ, what Russ was as opposed to what Russ will continue to be. Like I was saying, I think we're about to see the best couple seasons from Derek Carr over this year and the next. And I think we're about to see the start of the decline, not to where Russ is going to suck or anything, but to where he's just not going to have as productive of seasons as Derek Carr.
Derek Carr or Dak Prescott?
Dak.
Yeah.
Dak is that dude is surgical.
I agree.
That dude's really good.
My guy Justin Fields.
Derek Carr.
Yeah.
I hope you guys protect that kid and invest in him.
I agree.
I still think there's a lot. Justin's got a lot of mental toughness, and in a future day we can talk more about Fields, but I really hope you invest and protect that kid.
Absolutely. Famous Jameis.
Oh, I pick Derek Carr.
yes, absolutely. Jalen Hurts.
Derek Carr.
Wow. Okay. I'm actually on record with a Cowboys fan saying that Jalen Hurts might be in the MVP conversation this year.
Whoa, really?
So actually, that was before the AJ trade.
Before AJ Brown.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you got to have a controversial take, right?
Sure.
But I like his progression, and when you look back to college and how he's progressed, I mean, that's what you want to see in a quarterback. It's so easy to look at a quarterback coming in, in just first couple of years and say, oh well, let's write him off, especially in Philly.
Mm-hmm.
Here's my guy, Las Vegas to Detroit Sports Radio, saying, "Let's go Raiders." So
let's go Raiders, silver and black.
We're gonna have to connect you guys after this.
Raider Nation.
All right, so I have one last one here, and this is probably my favorite, being in the Friesen for NFC North podcast. Derek Carr or Kirk Cousins?
Those two are the most similarly compared.
Yes.
I fall on the side of, I kind of view them as similar. I think that a lot of people, especially with Kirk, look at his contract and just the dude's so overrated, and then they do the primetime numbers thing and all that sort of stuff. I go Derek Carr because the one thing he can do that Cousins really doesn't is being able to add just a little bit of playing out of structure. And for a while, we didn't see that in Carr's game. For a while, we did not see him throwing on the run. We did not see him taking things out of structure. You would, my first read's not open, my second read's not open, I got to scramble and make something happen off script. You don't see Kirk Cousins doing that. Mm-hmm. Kirk Cousins is how the play is drawn up on a whiteboard is how Kirk Cousins is doing it. And then if that doesn't work, he's kind of just trying to get rid of the ball and survive till second down and hopefully not throw a pick.
And is Carr almost better with teammates too than Cousins?
I would think so. It's always tough because we aren't in the locker room. You know what I mean? It's always tough. And I've never heard Kirk talk bad about people. He doesn't seem like a bad guy. He might just seem like he's kind of a little different than a lot of people are, which different can be a really good thing, especially considering where we are now as a world, as a country, embrace people that are different and things that are different, of course. And Cousins actually has something that's really cool that I found out about him that some people think is pretty weird. He has that. Have you seen this like giant jar of rocks he has outside of his front doorstep? So he has this giant thing of rocks. And what it is it's the average number of days that a human being lives, right? There's that many rocks in that pot. And he has it basically like stacked up to how many days, quote unquote, the average person would have left at his point in life. So every time he leaves his front door, he pulls a rock out to be like, this is a day. This rock represents a day. And those other rocks represent other days that I'm likely to have. What am I going to do with this day? I think that's really dope and an awesome perspective to have when looking at life and really just giving that visual representation, the physical touch representation of let's not waste what we have. So I think he's cool.
Doing a Raiders podcast, I didn't think I was going to get a Kirk Cousins story, but that was an amazing one.
Yeah, I can't remember where I read it. I think it was someone posted the photo on Twitter, like, this is so weird. And then I went and read on the story, like, why is that weird? I like that.
Yeah, and especially if it works for him, too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Well, I guess, I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about, the Colin Kaepernick, workout. I mean, what are your thoughts on, him getting, an opportunity to work out for the Raiders? And do you see him, being signed or was it just kind of like a gesture, or what were your thoughts on that?
As for the first part of the question, what did I think about him getting the workout? I loved it. I loved to see it. Like the fact that there's been, like, especially dating back to when, he was first started he was doing the kneeling and what that was really awesome cause. I, of course, loved it, being black myself and having dealt with issues like that, not being shot at necessarily from police, but guns pulled on me for reasons they shouldn't have been from police and things like that. So I love the way that he went about it with something such as just taking a knee, which, you know, I mean, to go into what that was, you know, just my stance on it, like in any other form of, you know, in funerals, when you propose, when I propose to my wife, we get on knees. This is a sign of respect, but also just to bring attention to it. I think that's just a way to be peaceful about it, to not be hateful about it, and just bring awareness to that. Whether or not it was received or not, still an issue, still people talk about it, but I love that part of it. And bringing him in for a workout, that's something Al Davis, Mark's dad, the owner, would have done a long time ago. Al was at the forefront of diversity, employing women, empowering women within something so macho and male dominantly testosterone driven as the NFL. He was able to just move through these exteriors that we all have and see people for what they are and bring them in and champion them for their diversity and for what they can bring to teams. And so that's what I really think was something he was thinking within a stroke of that. Whether or not he was doing this, ironically enough, at the same time when John Gruden was suing the NFL and has now found that his is going to go to trial based on John Gruden going out the way he did, whether or not it was a PR stunt to kind of maybe take some air out of those sails of Gruden, we're going to see. And I don't even necessarily know if he doesn't hire Kaepernick, that we can say whether or not he only did that as a facade or that was just like a smokescreen. We'll never really know. The workout was off limits. You didn't really see how he looked, but we do know this. Since Colin Kaepernick has not been employed by the NFL, there have been a lot worse quarterbacks employed by the NFL, not instead of Colin Kaepernick. So that's my stance on it. I would love to see them sign him. And this isn't my personal opinion. I saw this on Twitter yesterday, so I don't want to take credit for it. I wish I knew who said it. But someone said they should sign Colin Kaepernick as a backup and bring him in at the end of victory formations just to take a knee.
Wow. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, so I thought that was awesome. So if they honestly did that, that would just, I mean, imagine like first week, first week, of course, it's football, everyone's happy, Raiders are winning, Vegas is going nuts, and then you bring in Kaepernick to take a knee victory for, I mean, chef's kiss. I mean, that would be beautiful, you know.
Yeah, I'm really surprised that well, and maybe not that it didn't happen, before this,
Right.
And it is so interesting. I mean, it brings up, a lot of questions about, there's so many different questions, but, it needed to happen. If he wanted to happen, you give him the tryout and you see if he can do it. The only question would be, would he want to be a backup? And if he would, then, and he's got that talent still, you gotta sign him.
Right. You do. And the thing I wonder too is, and this is always the other part of kind of where Kaepernick has been going with this, is now he stepped outside of being a football player. Is that his primary goal? Or is he wanting to continue to do more things to use his platform to champion social justice, to bring awareness to systemic racism, things like that? Can he still do both? Of course he can if he wants to. It's his life. But is there's always the thing, is he doing more by not being on an NFL team, or does he do being on an NFL team? I think now, because his message has been received, because we've been talking about it for so long, I think now is the time to where if he still does have some ability to bring something to an NFL team, yeah, bring him on as a backup. And for sure, dudes in the locker room are going to love and embrace, and that's going to bring a lot of, like, if he comes in and people, like, he just walks in that day, Derek Carr will greet him with open arms. All the teammates are just going to love to have him there. And when you have that type of influence and that type of positive energy, that togetherness aspect in a locker room, it matters.
It is interesting because, you wonder and look back and, if, him being signed, like, media circus and all of that, that would come along with it. But really, with the Raiders, I mean, that would almost be the perfect, situation scenario with where they're at.
Absolutely. I mean, when John Gruden, the whole thing with his emails leaked and all that, and just to consider, how, you have to commend Rich Bisaccia last year. Like, I mean, I don't know if he could have done better, in terms of keeping things together, keeping things on track. There was just so much, like, I talked about this a lot on the Cover Zero podcast. The season that the Raiders had, from Henry Ruggs to Damon Arnett to John Gruden, all those things. But despite the natural adversity that comes with being on an NFL team and going through a season, you don't see one team go through all of those in one season. You just don't. And then to still keep that together, and then to now then go from that to, if you do bring in Kaepernick, it really would be pretty storybook and pretty dope to see.
You bring up Rich Bisaccia. Were you surprised he didn't get the head coach for this year?
A little bit. I was. There's always that question with the interim head coach, and just it's almost like it's kind of like, was he ever truly even a candidate to possibly be on the table? And if we don't bring in Josh McDaniels and get a change within next level leadership, maybe he does stay. And so, but the players really signed off on Rich, and they all did. He's the man for the job. They all really loved him, and I'm glad he still has a job in the NFL. If he wanted to be the head coach, I thought he would have really had a claim towards keeping that seat, just considering everything that he dealt with. Managing egos is one aspect of being a coach. X's and O's is another. Being able to deal with adversity and keep guys together and focused on a common goal is another portion of coaching. And in just a half a season dealing with all of that, I mean, the dude did a phenomenal job. And if we were going to this season, Rich Bisaccia as the head coach, I still would have a lot of motivation and a lot of faith in him as that.
With everything that's happened over the last, year and a half or whatever, with the Raiders, and and now even last year with the Bengals getting to the Super Bowl, it almost seems like it's opened up a lane for some newer teams to kind of sneak in. And when you look at the Raiders, if they were to get to the Super Bowl, I mean, what would that mean to the area? I mean, they're still kind of I don't know, what I mean. I'm sure they're probably still kind of getting, the fan base in Las Vegas. I mean, they got other fans. I mean, what would that mean to the area, for them to, or maybe even the franchise for them to get to the Super Bowl?
It would. I'm sitting here. I'm 37 years old. I have never seen any of my NFL, any of my, professional sports teams apart from the San Francisco Giants win a championship. Right? I've never seen that. Portland Trailblazer fan. Obviously it's 1977. I wasn't born yet. Raiders won the year before I was born in 84, won in 81, right? And the only time I've ever seen my squad in the Super Bowl was when we got demolished by the Bucs. So what would it mean to get there? There was a long time where this team was after that 2002 to 2003 Super Bowl year where we got demolished by the Bucs. After that, went right back to a laughingstock for a while and almost viewed as a joke, and the team wasn't the same. And a lot of people outside of, Denver fans, KC fans, Charger fans can say that the NFL is better when the Raiders are better. You know what I mean? I feel like a lot of the NFL has that view, but when their fan base is so large and for a long time, the success of the team was not good, you're able to see the fans that were there because they were just diehard fans. And it would mean a ton. And of course, in Vegas, like you were saying, you're going to get people that just want to go to football in Vegas. And it's going to be tough to parse out just upon, looking at sheer numbers of attendance and that sort of thing on how much of the real fans are there. But once you sit down and you talk to people who are Raider fans, it'd mean the world. Like it would, I would lose it. I would, like, if they just went to the Super Bowl, could not probably focus on anything. My wife would be like, my kids, the day job, all that stuff. It would be, I can't put it into words right now, even to really think about what that is, because that seems like a goal I've thought about ever since I've been a little kid, seeing them be in one only once and just the way that went down. And then to get back, man, it would mean everything just to see them get back to that spot and to see this team get there. And just to true diehard Raider fans, you always you stick with your team through thick and thin. And when they get to the pinnacle, you want nothing more than to see them win it.
Well, this is going to be an exciting, season, regardless of how it ends. I mean, there's a lot to kind of look forward to, and I appreciate you sitting down to talk to me about that. And where can everyone find you again?
Yeah, you can get at me at JR Sports Bars, Twitter, Instagram, and listen to the Cover Zero podcast wherever you get your podcasts, on Spotify, on Apple, presented by the SSAW network. Big shout out to our umbrella of other teams that we have, other podcasts we're covering. Ringside Mayhem is one that does our shout out to them. It's one of our wrestling affiliates. They do a lot covering all different types of professional wrestling, and they're putting out about 2 shows a week, so you can find them there as well. Big shout out to the Full Court Press, our basketball guys, Diamond Talk, our baseball guys. We're doing a lot of things. SSAW, standing for Specialized Sports Analysis Worldwide. And as the season starts to really ramp up, we're going to get back to having, once a week shows. When the season goes, we're twice a week. And so you can find us on Spotify, the Cover Zero Podcast. Apple is the same. And yeah, they'll be posted on the socials as well. So keep following us. And yeah, got a lot of stuff coming down the pipeline for us.
Awesome. Thanks again, Jordan. We'll definitely have to connect again in season.
Yeah, no, very much appreciated. I really appreciate you reaching out and having me on. It was a lot of fun. We'll have to do this again.
Once again, it's been NFL Outdated Cover 2 series on the Las Vegas Raiders. And, is it Go Raiders or?
It's Raider Nation.
Raider
One
Nation.
Nation. Raider Nation. Just win, baby.
Thanks again.
Thank you.